Shred Psyche, so move away with that, please. Everyone else just get close to the boss.
Second.
Oh, it was 2, was it?
Yeah.
Switch to these ads now, guys. They're behind us. Oh god, they have a lot of health.
Oh.
Hard swap to them, please. Oh my god.
Oh.
Huh. Can we CC them at all? Stun them anything?
Oh.
Oh.
That's a lot.
Not stunnable.
Oh,
you
you
run
can break
through.
it.
Oh, these are. Oh,
We've
dude,
got
it's just a
phalanx.
wall.
Oh, it's the
Coven.
fucking Antorus.
Yeah, it's the Antorus wall.
That's a lot of damage.
Ladies and gentlemen, another 2 bosses for Ny'Alotha, the Waking City, have appeared on the PTR, and we are now up to 5, if you're keeping count, of the 12 boss raid that's hitting us in 8.3, and all looking good so far. I will point out, though, these 2 are edging into the buggy and broken territory of testing on the PTR, where the bosses aren't working as intended, so you will see things that are absolutely not going to take place on live, because we're bypassing mechanics. Not quite as bad as the Alt F4 strategy that we had to use on Shadhar, but you know, it's going to get a little bit iffy, and that's okay. That's all part of the fun of doing the PTR, is you get to deal with some real crazy things. I'm going to kick things off tonight, though, with Raden, the returning Raden from the Throne of Thunder. I imagine Blizzard thinks that not many people actually got to see Raden, as he was the optional boss, the optional extra mythic difficulty boss, or heroic, or whatever it was back then. Not the only returning face in here. If you've not seen the Dungeon Journal, Il'gynoth is returning as well. We haven't tested that yet, so we will see what's going on there soon, hopefully. Raden, very, very similar to the Throne of Thunder version, actually. Really, really similar. Not that surprising, but still. If you've done it before, you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know exactly how to deal with this fight. But it is one of those fights that's a little on the awkward side. So I'll go through it. It has 2 phases. Phase 1 is 100% to 40%. So the first 60% of his HP. And then the final phase is 40% and down. So in phase 1, he's going to summon these 2 orbs. We have the Vita orb returning from his original incarnation, and now we have a Shadow orb. And the intention here is that you alternate between them. So as these orbs appear and travel towards the boss, you will kill one, meaning the other one will reach the boss. And you're supposed to do like a Vita phase and a Shadow phase and a Vita phase and a Shadow phase. Now, these, they haven't quite worked out the debuffs properly. If you just tanked Raden at the back, you could just do the same one over and over. You do get debuffed, meaning that if you had 2 of the same phase back to back, then you should die. They do give you a damage buff. I think one of them's crit and one of them's haste. But you could just, the debuff didn't last long enough. So if you just moved Raden further away, you could just do one phase over and over again. And each of the phases presents its own challenges, meaning that if one of them is more difficult than the other one for your group, then you could just keep doing that one. So hopefully Blizzard will change that. We don't want to see that happening, really. So what does it do when the Shadow Orb hits him? Well, then he does his shadowy stuff, which involves pools of soaking. He's going to drop orbs from the sky, similar to Zekvos, where you have to have one person stand in them. They will get debuffed and obviously take some damage, meaning they can't soak again. And with our raid group size, there were 5 of these. So you had 5 people who just ran out and soaked these orbs. These were a little bit awkward. I was hoping they would be more like Zekvos, where you could control where the orb was going to be. This time around, though, they seemed to pick a place that was in a radius of where the last one spawned. So you get a pool spawn, somebody would stand in it, and then it would go, okay, I'm going to drop the next pool somewhere within like 20 yards of this one. Meaning that sometimes by the 5th or the 4th orb soak, that they were really far away from the boss. So it's not that big of a concern. You just have the ranged DPS go out there. Obviously Moonkins, BM hunters, or hunters in general. Absolutely no issue doing this thing. But it's something they might want to consider is making it controllable, because it's just a little annoying that sometimes they're spawning really far away from where the boss is. And this is a fight where you kind of want to keep Raden in a certain position. And it just makes it a little bit frustrating for the healers. On top of that, he will add an extra debuff to the raid, which is supposed to be soaked by the whole raid. This was broken on the PTR and did millions of damage and was just unable to be soaked. The whole idea is that the person with the debuff goes and stands on everybody so you can share the damage, but that wasn't working. So we're literally just sacrificing people from the start. That's as simple as it is. We can't survive it, so if you get debuffed, unlucky for you, go out and die. But that's essentially the Shadow phase. There's also a Shadow ad that needs to be killed. The ad is the one applying this deadly debuff. So the quicker you kill that, the less people we had to just suicide, essentially. So that's how that worked. Once you let the Vita Orb hit the boss, more traditional to what you'll have seen in any of the Raden kill videos, which is handling the unstable Vita. This is a debuff that jumps from player to the furthest player away from that player and creates a little shock line in between. So what you want to do is have the whole raid stacked in one place, and then the two people go out to the left, far left back and far right back, and they jump this between them as people rotate in and out. You can only take the debuff once before it kills you. So one person gets it, it jumps to someone else. The person who no longer has the debuff moves back into the raid and somebody else replaces him. So you get this nice swapping going on of the debuff out of the way of the raid so it doesn't shock anyone else. Again, if you've seen a Raden video, you'll have seen all the players doing this. A variety of methods of handling this debuff, but not particularly difficult. Actually far easier and allows for far more DPS than the Shadow one, in my opinion, as the entire raid, besides 2 people, can just nuke the boss during this. Also spawns another ad. Nothing particularly scary. And phase 1, all the way down to 40%, is just going to repeat this cycle. Now, this is the kind of thing I don't like in bosses. It's not that big of a deal. I think this boss is still very, very cool. It has the potential to be super brutal on Mythic, as it's already very, very brutal on Heroic. It is killable. It's no problem. We could kill it. We wiped it, as we usually do with testing. If you're not sure, I saw some people asking us, like, why do you intentionally wipe? Well, we intentionally wipe because we want to test the boss and try different things, so we don't really want to kill it, so it's no longer there. And also, in the past, if you killed bosses on the PTR, it could create weird things with those characters in terms of being locked to the instance, which meant you had to create brand new characters sometimes for the next testing. So we have no intention of killing any of the bosses that we get to test on the PTR. We just leave them alone and let Blizzard despawn them and do things like that. That's how we do it. What's the 40% and below, you ask? Good question. It's just a burn. It's just a flat-out burn the boss to the ground. He's going to do massive damage. He absolutely slaps the tanks in this phase. He drops shadow explosions all over the place, and the entire purpose from 40% to 0 is to burn him down before he just destroys the entire raid, which is what he is going to do. He's AoEing the raid. He's doing all kinds of stuff. The reason I don't like this style of fight is, essentially, if you can handle the mechanics, which most guilds will, then the whole fight comes down to the burn phase. And the rest of it, that 100% to 40%, is just waiting to start the actual difficult part of the fight, which isn't that difficult because it's just a straight up burn. And if that burn is really tight, as in you need everybody alive doing maximum damage, then that can be really frustrating, having to sit through 100% to 40% over and over again before the fight really gets going into its difficult encounter. So that's something I don't particularly like, although it's not a big deal by any means. It's not like, oh my god, not again. It's nothing like that at all. It's just like, I can see us being in a situation where we're like, okay, we've got to do this, all this again, and then we've just got to DPS. And that's the end of the phase. So there's Raden. Let's look at the second boss that we got to test, although I will point out Raden is one of the later bosses. He's like boss number 9 of 12, where the next boss we tested, the Prophet Skitra, is actually 3rd in the dungeon journal. So it's like supposedly around boss number 3. Now, Prophet Skitra has the potential to be really interesting. Once again, was sort of brutally all over the place in terms of how it was tuned, and we had to do all sorts of crazy stuff to try and counter it. The fight itself, though, has the potential to be really, really cool once it's in its final state. So the Prophet Skitra, again, has 2 phases. These rotate every 20%. Which seems a little bit too often for my liking, and you'll hear why shortly. In phase 1, you're just DPSing the boss, and then, depending on your raid size, either 1, 2, or 3 people. So if you had the maximum amount of people, the 30 people in Heroic, you got 3 of these ads. They get debuffed, and they have to go drop an ad outside of the raid. And then this ad is going to cast an AoE, which basically one-shots anything stood near it. And then it starts pulsing AoE onto the raid after that, where you have to kill it. And you have to kill this thing fast, because during the testing, it was hotfixed towards the later end of the testing, but still not great, is this damage was so absurd. It was unbelievable how much damage these things did. With our raid size, we got 2 of these ads. Ultimately, we ended up using 9 healers to try and just survive these things, which allowed us to make some progress. Ultimately, we ended up dropping down to an 18-man raid, which only gave you 1 ad, which basically did nothing, allowed you to just straight up kill the boss after this. But it was pretty wacky. Now, that's all this phase really is get the debuff, drop the ads in a safe place, then kill the ads and continue to DPS the boss for 20% of his HP. Once it hit that 20% threshold, so 80%, phase 2 began, which was the illusion phase. Now you'll notice, and this was something we very much were aware of, is this room is suspiciously shaped. It's enormous. And you've also seen that they've added this phalanx mechanic in. I will point out the phalanx does not reach the wall, so you can stand completely safe and completely ignore this mechanic, although it's not a hard mechanic to deal with in the first place, because they can be perma-rooted, they can be death gripped. Everything that you could imagine from the Coven of Shavara, where you saw a similar mechanic, all applies here. They're fully CC'able. They don't even really one-shot you. You have to go and stand in them in order for them to kill you, but although I'm sure on Mythic they will. But it looks fancy, but it's a neither here nor there mechanic that's going on. When the illusion phase starts, half of your raid will be debuffed with one color, like red, and the other half will be debuffed with a different color, which will be purple. And in that phase, only one of the ads is shared between two groups. So these ads will spawn, these giant versions, these copies of the boss will spawn in the room. And this giant room, and you'll have like 5 are visible by the guys marked with red, and 5 are visible by the guys marked with purple. One of them is shared between 2, and the raid has to communicate very quickly and figure out which of these 5 ads is the one that both groups can see. Now, if you were to not kill that one, so once you've figured which one it is, you have to kill that one. If you kill one of the wrong ones, then you wipe the raid, essentially. That's the design there. You have to kill the correct one. And it's all about communication on figuring that out. Now, a number of ways you can do this. They have disabled markers, so you can't like mark each of them with a skull and a cross or whatever in one of the groups. The other group can't see it. But world markers still work. So one of the things we tried, amongst a number of ways of figuring this out, it's not that hard, is to put world markers down very, very quickly. So let's say the raid leader gets marked with red, he can see 5 ads, he drops 5 world markers, and the guys with the purple debuff just go, okay, there's a world marker next to red, that's the one, because we can both see an ad at that world marker. Very, very simple process in order to figure that out. And then you just kill that one. While it pulses AoE on the raid, so you need to do it relatively quickly, otherwise it's going to wipe you, but ultimately not that hard to do. Now, the problem I had with this, honestly, is I liked the mechanic, I liked the shape of the room, it gave some interest, is that it happened way too often. 20% just seemed really stupid for this, because it just made the fight that's not that complex, certainly for heroic, take a really long time, because ultimately it was going to look like a 10 or 12 minute kill in order to actually kill this fight. It was like, ugh, nothing much is happening. Once you've understood how to handle phase 1 and phase 2, there's nothing else to learn. It's not going to do anything else till it dies. And because the damage realistically is only this pulsing AoE, then, you know, everybody kind of gets a bit bored at that point of just like, we're killing ads, and then we kill another ad, and eventually we'll wear the boss down. So, could definitely use some changes here. I don't think it needs to do this illusion phase this often. We don't need to see it like 4 times, right? We're going to see it 80%, 60%, 40%, and 20%. We don't need to see that 4 times until the boss dies, because it's not that hard in the first place. It's not that interesting. It's really cool in small doses. It's cool in small doses. It just doesn't need to be this often. But a fight that has the potential with a little bit of tweaking here and there to be very cool, which does mean that of all 5 bosses so far that we've got to test in Ny'Alotha, no big shitters so far. All looking really good. No Blackwater Behemoths so far. No Radiance of Asharas so far. Actually really cool, interesting fights. A little bit of tweaking here and there, and we could be looking at a very solid raid. But having said that, we have 7 more bosses to see in this raid. We've got Dark Inquisitor Zanash. We've got the Hive Mind to see yet. We've got Dresda Gath to see yet. Vexiona to see yet. Il'gynoth to see yet. The Carapace of N'Zoth, and of course N'Zoth himself. So plenty more to see in Ny'Alotha, which is still, in my opinion, shaping up to be a solid raid. So pay attention for those guys. More raid testing, no doubt, on the later end of next week. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.